I love breaking the rules with the iPhones. I've had my iPhone at -50, -60. I've had them completely frozen solid. And I've had them the other end of the spectrum, like, in Death Valley or in Namibia, in the deserts, in the middle of summer at plus 50 degrees Celsius or, in excess of 115 Fahrenheit, 120 Fahrenheit. And yeah, eventually they conk out, but come right back to life once you plug them in again.
Ray Zahab is extreme. Explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, founder of Impossible to Possible. He's not content just to simply run marathons or ultra marathons, to bike trails or mountains. No, Ray wants to run and bike continents, put foot and wheel to the world. The Sahara Desert, 70 kilometers a day for 111 days, 400 kilometers across Canada, the Arctic, Namibia, Baffin Island, the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, Death Valley, the Amazon, and the list goes on and on and on. He's been using the MacBook Pro to share his experiences with kids in classrooms around the world, the iPhone to document his journeys, and increasingly, the Apple Watch to, well, keep him alive. We talk about all of that and more in the latest episode of my brand new podcast, the audio version of which should be hitting your favorite podcast player anytime now. Or if you have Nebula or the early access tier of my Patreon, and yeah, I've got Patreon now because indie, remember? You can head on over and watch the entire 30-minute conversation right now. Links to everything in the description below. For this video though, I wanted to focus on the really interesting ways Ray uses his Apple Watch. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is the Apple Watch Extreme.
I fell into Apple Watch in a really interesting way. I met some of the folks in California from Apple many, many years ago after running the Sahara. So that would have been 2007, 2008 timeframe. And some of the content that that was shot on, it was an Academy Award-winning filmmaker, actually, James Mall, that shot that. They used some of that footage in Final Cut Pro tutorials, I believe, back in that day. In starting my foundation, Impossible to Possible, which is based in California, the goal of that organization is free of charge to take young people around the world on expeditions where they learn about a place, connect it to students in schools, and we use, obviously, the best technology we can get our hands on. So we're using MacBook Pros to create content. We're using iPads, in many different ways, and especially now with augmented reality, that's expanded. We're using these tools to create the best content that we can to upload. So I became familiar with a lot of the Apple devices, and then iPhone 3, et cetera, right? On until where we are now with the iPhone 11 Pro. But it was, I think, Apple Watch, maybe it was the second Apple Watch. Somebody came to me and mentioned it from the Apple team, said, hey, listen, you got to try this out for your run. And I'm thinking to myself, no disrespect, but honestly, the phone does everything I need. I have the iPad. I have my MacBook. I mean, what is that watch going to do, really, that the other things aren't already doing? Like, it's just too much technology kind of thing is where my head was going. And then I got the Apple Watch. I think I started with the 3. And I was like, now I can't live without it, right? It's attached to my wrist all the time. And so I think first and foremost, from a person who does what I do, that trains full time, is constantly on the go, it does everything, it's doing everything for me, and it's instantaneous, but it also tracks health data, which is critical to me. So right off the top, I can run my business, but I can communicate with people from my watch when I'm out training. I'm catching important emails or texts. Some people want to be completely disconnected, but there's some days when you're a volunteer in your own organization, it's your time is like as precious as as the investment that's made. So I don't want to miss any important emails on those days. I can rely on my watch, or I can turn it off and listen to my music if I want, or I can collect heart rate data and all that stuff that's useful to me. So right away from the very beginning, it's been very useful from those purposes. But you and I had the conversation on the bus that day about Apple Watch, and for me, how it's been a super effective tool for recovery. And I think what was so interesting about what Apple Watch was doing early on was I could take all of that data in the health app, et cetera, and activity apps and third-party apps, and use the watch as a way to figure out, am I doing enough on the recovery end? Am I consuming enough calories? Am I getting enough rest? Am I doing the things I need to do so that I can get up, train harder the next day, da 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 da, so that I can get the job done. So right away, that's been the biggest value for me. Is it's not necessarily how far have I ran today, but moreover, what's been the effect of the training on my body, in the heavy training periods.
So how do you do that? Because I think just looking at it, people can see, like, I stand when it says to stand. I try to get my 30 minutes of exercise in, fill that ring up. I can use the workout apps and I can read the readouts. But you were sort of doing math on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I was able to, by going in, there's some third-party apps out there as well. I was able to determine my elevation gained on my runs. So really defining my workouts. And I train a lot by elevation, by how much I run uphill and downhill rather than the distance that I train. Yeah. So I go out to train for a specific period of time and elevation. And so those you combine those two things, and whatever distance is spit out at the end of my training, that's what my day is. I don't say to myself, well, I'm going to run 10K today. Very rare. I say to myself, I want to get 1,000 feet or 350 meters of climbing or whatever in, and that's what I start out with. But using the activity app, and there's sleep apps and there's all kinds of things, I'm able to discern with a fair amount of accuracy what the load is on my body, what the training effect is on my body, and what the recovery effect is. So rather than it being, and I'm in tune with my body, and I listen to my body, and I know what foods work for me and which don't. But what was interesting, what I figured out from the Apple Watch, I went through a period in my training where I just wasn't kind of feeling, this is pre-Apple Watch, where I was not really feeling 100%. And I learned two things from my Apple Watch: that I wasn't getting enough sleep, and my room wasn't cool enough for me to get that sleep. So, I would have never figured this stuff out. And I was eating too late. And I was able to figure that out by looking at all the data, mapping out how my runs went the next day. And I was able to correct my inefficiencies that I was having so that I could train better. And I don't want to get too scientific with it or whatever, but honestly, when you're running every single day and that's kind of like your job, you want to feel as good as you possibly can, right? Yeah. And I'm not getting any younger. I'm 51, right? So the more data I can get, the better I can train to go. I just finished an Arctic expedition in January. I was January up in the Arctic, self-contained, hauling all my gear. It's hard to do that. Yeah. So, I want to be as fit as I can be. And I found that the data I get from the Apple Watch, you're able to really sort of figure it out. And it's intuitive, because I'm not that smart. So like if you pick up a device and it's not easy to use, I have issues with that. Too many buttons, too many programs, too many this, too many that. Apple Watch, it's very, very easy to use, especially when you use it with your phone.
So was it like an iterative process for you where you tweak something and like tweak your sleep or tweak the temperature and then see what improvements that made? Or were you able to sort of calculate it out?
You're exactly right. That's exactly what I did. I would take the data each day, and obviously you have up and down days anyhow. So I would scale it over the course of a month or two until I dialed it down to these things. And honestly, I had suspicions that I wasn't sleeping enough. That's easy enough to find out. But what was really interesting was being able to determine through trial and error and through the information that the Apple Watch was giving me that, I was having issues with room temperature, eating late, things like that, right? And calorie deficit earlier in the day, because I wasn't eating enough earlier in the day, so I wasn't recovering amply from the workouts that I was putting in. So it was just all this real, super simple information that you'd think would be, common sense. But, when you're in it every day and, we got kids and we're busy and we're working all the time, and like everybody is, you get busy, these things kind of fall to the side, but it's kind of like a little helper for you.
Yeah, and I think people talk a lot about using the Apple Watch for fitness and for workouts, but you don't hear them talking as much about taking the results from all of that, analyzing it, and applying it to things like recovery.
Yeah, literally, it's such an interesting perspective, and same with my friends that I train with, that I trail run with, that use Apple Watch for that. We all look at it as recovery information. Yeah. It's interesting, right? It's like horse before the cart, cart before the horse, right? Like chicken or egg or chicken. So it's just a different way of looking at the data. And I'm less concerned about the metrics of the workout as I am about how am I recovering from the workout, because every workout's hard. So I know I'm going to go pretty hard, but I can determine with a fair rate of accuracy now, and intuitively, because I've learned from the watch, I know when I start feeling funky that, I better back it off today.
Yeah.
So, the other thing that's interesting you can do with it is you can do mapping. You can do basic navigation with the Apple Watch, which a lot of people don't know. So you can get third-party apps, again, View Ranger.
Okay.
And, from View Ranger with subscription, you can download maps. And you can download a route onto your map and then upload it or sync it, whatever the correct terminology is, with your Apple Watch. And then you've got that map and you can follow yourself on the map.
There's something you told me when last time I saw you too that just blew my mind, and that is, a lot of my friends have an Apple Watch because they're afraid if they fall when they're hiking, they won't be able to reach their phone or the fall detection will go off.
Yep.
But you are literally at the ends of the earth, and you were depending on the navigation data to actually get to your next food supply.
Yeah. On that trip I was, through that specific section of my route, I was relying on it. And so it's amazing what it can do, from that perspective. But even more amazing, some of these other features like walkie-talkie. If you're out with a group, right, and you still have cell phone reception, it works really well to communicate with your other friends that you're trail running. If we're scouting different routes, right, we can communicate with one another quite easily. So from a perspective of someone who's training and in the outdoors, there's other additional features besides the training stuff that when you really start digging into it, it's like any of these technologies. You and I were talking about the iPhone before, the 11 Pro. It wasn't until somebody from Apple told me, hey, if you put it on a tripod at night to take a night mode shot, the phone can detect that it's on a tripod, and then it'll increase the exposure time to up to 30 seconds or something like that. It's crazy. So then you can get these amazing shots that you never thought possible, right? Same thing with the watch.
You can follow Ray at Ray Zahab pretty much everywhere and find his nonprofit, which helps kids and students from around the world become involved in his adventures at Impossible to Possible. And to watch the rest of our podcast, where we talk about filming with the iPhone in extreme locations, how classrooms get involved, and how Ray changed his life and got into all of this to begin with, you'll find the audio version in your favorite podcast app. Or you can check it out early on Nebula and in the early access section of my Patreon at patreon.com/Rene Ritchie. When you sign up, you not only get to see the full video versions of this podcast in advance, you get to see scripts for most of my daily shows before they're even shot, as well as Discord, where we chat about Apple, gear, workflows, and more. And there are even ways to get your name in the description of every video or the credits. So, to get more involved in this community and contribute directly to the creation of these videos and future projects, check out patreon.com/Rene Ritchie. And thanks, sincerely, for your support. Now, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell gizmo so YouTube will actually tell you when new episodes go live, and that way we can hang out in the comments together for an hour or so and answer any of the questions you might have, and then hit up the comments and let me know. If you have an Apple Watch, how are you using it? And if you don't, what's still holding you back? Thanks for watching, and check out my Apple Watch 5 years later review right up there. See you next video.